You know what's funny about marriage? Everyone acts like gaining weight after you say I do is some kind of crime. Like the second you get comfortable with someone, you're supposed to stay frozen in time like some museum piece. Well, let me tell you about my marriage to Sergio and how everything went sideways, because apparently loving someone as they are has conditions nobody tells you about upfront. I'm Yolanda, and 3 years ago, I thought I had it all figured out. Sergio and I met at this wellness convention. Yeah, I know how that sounds now. But back then, it felt like fate. I was there representing my marketing firm. He was selling gym equipment, and we just clicked. I was 135 pounds of pure confidence, wearing this tight black dress that made every guy at that convention do a double take. Sergio couldn't keep his eyes off me, and I loved every second of it. We spent the entire day together, ditching our actual work responsibilities to grab coffee and talk about everything. He was different from other guys I'd dated, focused, ambitious, had his own rental properties, and seemed genuinely interested in building something real. When he asked me out that night, I already knew this was going somewhere serious. Our dating phase was like something out of a movie. 2 years of weekend trips, fancy dinners, and him constantly telling me how beautiful I was. He'd run his hands over my flat stomach and tell me I was perfect. We'd go to the gym together, and I'd catch him watching me on the treadmill with this look of pure pride, like I was his prize. When he proposed, I felt like I'd won the lottery. Here was this successful, attractive man who wanted to build a life with me. We talked about having 5 kids, yeah? 5, because we both made good money and wanted a big family. We owned rental properties. We traveled. We had this whole plan mapped out. But here's what nobody tells you about marriage. The second you get that ring, everything changes, not just for you, but for them too. Suddenly, Sergio wasn't just my boyfriend who thought I was gorgeous no matter what. He became this person who had opinions about everything I put in my mouth. The weight gain didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, comfortable. I'd always been naturally thin, never had to think about what I ate. So when I started putting on pounds after we got married, I figured it was just normal. I was happy, settled, cooking more, going out to nice restaurants. I went from 135 to about 180, and I still felt good about myself. But Sergio started making these little comments. Maybe we should skip dessert tonight. You sure you want seconds? Remember when you used to love going to the gym with me, always wrapped up in concern for my health? But I could see it in his eyes. I wasn't his perfect little trophy anymore. The thing is, I tried to laugh it off at first. I'd joke about how I already caught him, so I didn't need to maintain my body anymore. But he never laughed back. He'd get this serious look and say something about how we should both stay healthy for each other. Like my weight gain was some kind of betrayal of our marriage vows. What really got to me was how he stayed exactly the same. Still hitting the gym every day. Still looking like the man I married. Still getting attention from other women. Meanwhile, I'm supposed to feel guilty for enjoying food and being comfortable in my own home. The double standard was infuriating. But I kept it to myself because I didn't want to be the nagging wife who couldn't take constructive criticism. Looking back now, I can see how the resentment started building on both sides. He resented that I wasn't the same woman he married, and I resented that his love apparently came with a weight limit. But at the time, I just felt confused and hurt. This was supposed to be the man who loved me unconditionally, but every day I felt more and more like I was failing some test I didn't know I was taking. The breaking point came when my company started making changes that felt way too personal. I'd been killing it in my marketing role, traveling to conventions, being the face of our company at events. Then suddenly, they wanted to keep me behind the scenes and send this new girl, Melissa, to all the client meetings and conventions. Melissa was everything I used to be. Young, thin, energetic, fresh out of college with that eager-to-please attitude that made everyone love her instantly. When my boss explained that they thought my strengths were better utilized in campaign development rather than client-facing work, I knew exactly what was happening. They were basically benching me because I didn't look the part anymore. I came home crying that day, and instead of comforting me, Sergio saw it as the perfect opportunity to drive his point home. Well, if you really think it's about your weight, maybe this is the wake-up call you needed, he said, not even looking up from his laptop. I've been trying to help you get back in shape for months. That's when something inside me snapped. Here I was, dealing with what felt like discrimination at work. And my own husband was basically agreeing with them. You know what? I said, grabbing a spoon and heading straight for the ice cream in the freezer. There are plenty of men out there who appreciate a woman with curves. Real men who don't need their wives to look like magazine covers. His expression shifted to pure shock. Like he couldn't believe I'd actually said that out loud. What's that supposed to mean? He asked. But I was already walking away. I'd planted the seed, and it felt good to see him squirm for once. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I downloaded a dating app, not because I was planning to cheat, at least that's what I told myself, but because I needed to know that I was still desirable. That there were men out there who wouldn't make me feel like garbage for gaining some weight. Creating that profile felt like rebellion. I used recent photos, described myself as curvy and confident, and made it clear that if someone had a problem with real women, they could keep scrolling. Within hours, I had dozens of matches and messages from guys telling me how beautiful I was. The attention was intoxicating. After months of feeling invisible and unwanted in my own marriage, suddenly I had men competing for my attention. They complimented my smile, my eyes, my curves, all the things Sergio seemed to have stopped noticing. I started telling Sergio I was going to the track with coworkers to walk and get exercise. He seemed pleased that I was finally taking his advice, which made me feel even more justified in my deception. If he was going to treat me like I was broken and needed fixing, then maybe I deserved to find someone who appreciated me as I was. The conversations on the app became more frequent, more intimate. These men weren't asking me to change anything about myself. They were interested in my thoughts, my day, my feelings. It was everything my marriage had stopped being. When Evan messaged me, something was different. He wasn't just throwing around generic compliments like the other guys. He asked thoughtful questions, remembered details from our previous conversations, and made me laugh in ways I'd forgotten I could. He was 33, worked in finance, and had this confidence that reminded me of how Sergio used to be before he became my personal trainer. We talked for weeks before he suggested meeting in person. Just dinner, he said. I'd love to continue our conversation face to face. The rational part of me knew this was crossing boundaries, but the part of me that was starving for appreciation and respect was already saying yes. I told myself it was just dinner, just a chance to feel attractive and interesting again. Sergio had made it clear that the woman I'd become wasn't good enough for him. So why shouldn't I spend time with someone who thought I was perfect exactly as I was? Planning that dinner felt like preparing for the most important night of my life. I spent hours getting ready, trying on different outfits, doing my makeup just right. For the first time in months, I felt excited about how I looked instead of ashamed. I told Sergio I was going to dinner with the girls from work, and he barely looked up from his phone. Have fun? He said dismissively. Try to make healthy choices. Even when I was walking out the door in a dress that used to make him crazy, he didn't give me a second glance. That sealed it for me. If my own husband couldn't be bothered to notice when I made an effort, then I was definitely making the right choice. Meeting Evan at Chili's felt surreal. He stood up when I walked in, complimented my dress, pulled out my chair, all the things Sergio used to do, but had stopped bothering with. You look even more beautiful than your photos, he said, and I could tell he meant it. The conversation flowed effortlessly. He asked about my work, my interests, my dreams. When I mentioned the situation with my company, he was outraged on my behalf. That's completely unprofessional, he said. You deserve better than that. It was exactly what I'd needed to hear from Sergio, but never got. We ordered appetizers to share, and when I reached for a second mozzarella stick, there was no judgment, no comments about my choices. Evan just smiled and said, "Good choice. These are incredible. Such a simple thing." But after months of feeling monitored and criticized, it felt revolutionary. Halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed with a text from Sergio asking where we'd ended up going. Without thinking, I texted back BJ's Brewhouse, a complete lie, since we were clearly at Chili's. But I was so caught up in the moment, in feeling appreciated and desired, that the deception felt justified. Evan and I talked for over 2 hours. He told me about his work, his travels, his goals. He listened when I talked about feeling unappreciated at home and works. Any man who doesn't see how amazing you are is an idiot, he said, reaching across to touch my hand. The contact sent electricity through me. When was the last time Sergio had touched me like that? As the evening wound down, I found myself not wanting it to end. This was what I'd been missing, feeling seen, valued, desired. Evan made me remember who I used to be before I became someone's disappointing wife. I'd love to do this again, he said as we walked to our cars. Soon, I knew I should say no, should go home and try to fix things with Sergio. But looking at this man who thought I was perfect exactly as I was, I heard myself saying, I'd like that too. The drive home was a blur of guilt and excitement. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in months, but I also knew I was playing with fire. When I walked into the house, Sergio was on the couch watching TV. How was dinner? He asked without looking away from the screen. Good, I said, and technically it wasn't a lie. It had been the best evening I'd had in ages. The girls say hi. Another lie. But what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. If he'd been paying attention to his wife instead of treating her like a project to fix, maybe I wouldn't have needed to find appreciation elsewhere. That night, lying in bed next to my husband. I couldn't stop thinking about Evan, about how he'd looked at me, talked to me, made me feel. Sergio was already asleep, probably dreaming about his perfect gym routine, while I was wide awake planning my next escape from this suffocating marriage. The second date with Evan was even better than the first. We met at a different restaurant across town, and this time I didn't even bother with a cover story that made sense. I told Sergio I was meeting coworkers again, and he just nodded absently while scrolling through his phone. His complete lack of interest in my life made it easier to justify what I was doing. Evan and I had moved past the getting to know you phase into something deeper. He talked about his past relationships, how he'd learned to appreciate women for who they really were, not who he wanted them to be. I've never understood men who try to change their partners. He said, if you don't love someone as they are, why are you with them? It was like he was speaking directly to my soul. Here was a man who got it, who understood that love shouldn't come with conditions and requirements. We held hands across the table, and I felt more connected to him in that moment than I had to Sergio in months. What I didn't know was that Sergio had been tracking my phone. Apparently, my husband had finally decided to pay attention to his wife, just not in the way I'd hoped. He'd noticed the inconsistencies in my stories, the way I'd been dressing up for these supposed work dinners, how happy I seemed when I came home. I was in the middle of telling Evan about my frustrations with Sergio when I saw a familiar figure approaching our table. My stomach dropped as I realized my husband was walking straight toward us, his jaw set in that way that meant trouble. Hey, Yolanda, Sergio said, his voice deadly calm. How's dinner with your coworkers going? The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife. I felt like a deer in headlights, my mind racing for an explanation that would make this okay. But there was no explaining away being caught on a date with another man. Sergio, what are you doing here? I managed to stammer. Funny thing, he said, pulling up a chair without being invited. I thought you said you were at BJ's Brewhouse, but here you are at Chili's? With someone who definitely doesn't look like any of your female co-workers. Evan, to his credit, tried to defuse the situation. Listen, man, I had no idea she was married. She told me she was single. If I'd known, I never would have. She told you she was single. Sergio's voice rose slightly, and I could see other diners starting to stare. Interesting. Yolanda, is there something you'd like to share with the class? The humiliation was overwhelming. Here I was, caught red-handed, with my husband confronting me in public and my date learning that I'd been lying to him too. I grabbed my purse and tried to leave. But Sergio followed me outside. 3 years of marriage. He said once we were in the parking lot. 3 years? And this is what it comes to. You lying to my face and going on dates with other men. You pushed me to this? I shot back, finally finding my voice. You made me feel like garbage about myself every single day. You stopped loving me the minute I gained weight. What did you expect? I expected my wife to talk to me instead of cheating on me, he said. I expected the woman I married to have enough respect for our marriage to work on our problems, instead of running to the first guy who told her what she wanted to hear. But I was past the point of rational discussion. The embarrassment, the anger, the months of feeling criticized and unloved all came pouring out. You want to know the truth. Evan appreciates me exactly as I am. He doesn't make me feel like I need to change everything about myself to be worthy of love. Maybe if you'd been half the husband he is as a date, we wouldn't be here. Sergio's face went stone cold, and I knew I'd gone too far. But I was too angry to care. I'd been caught, humiliated, and exposed, and all I could think about was how this was somehow his fault for not loving me enough. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Sergio had evidence of my dating app, screenshots of my lies, and witness testimony from Evan about how I'd presented myself as single. I tried to argue that his constant criticism about my weight had driven me to seek validation elsewhere, but apparently emotional neglect isn't grounds for adultery in the eyes of the law. My lawyer kept pushing me to show remorse, to take responsibility for my actions. If you can demonstrate that you understand the gravity of what you did, she said, we might be able to negotiate better terms. But why should I apologize for finding someone who appreciated me? Sergio had made it clear that the woman I'd become wasn't good enough for him, so I found someone who disagreed. The property division was straightforward, since we'd kept our assets separate, but the emotional toll was devastating. Sergio moved out within a week of catching me with Evan, gathering his belongings while I was at work, so we wouldn't have to face each other again. The thing about Evan that I hadn't fully grasped during our dinner dates was that he was looking for excitement, not commitment. Once the thrill of the forbidden was gone and I was just another divorced woman, his interest waned quickly. Our conversations became shorter, his responses less enthusiastic. Within a month of my divorce being finalized, he'd moved on to someone else, probably another married woman looking for validation. Meanwhile, I was alone in a house that felt too big, with rental properties that suddenly seemed like more work than they were worth. The weight I'd gained during my marriage continued to climb as stress ate my way through the loneliness. Sergio had been right about one thing. My eating habits were out of control. And without the structure of marriage, they got worse. Work became another source of stress. Melissa had officially taken over all the client-facing responsibilities, and I found myself relegated to behind-the-scenes work that felt like a demotion, disguised as a lateral move. My boss started making comments about fresh perspectives and new energy, which I knew was code for wanting someone younger and more attractive representing the company. The dating apps that had once been a source of validation became a reminder of how much my market value had dropped. The messages became fewer and less flattering. The men who did respond were clearly looking for easy hookups rather than genuine connections. I was learning the hard way that being a divorced woman in her 30s with relationship baggage wasn't the liberation I'd imagined. About 8 months after our divorce was finalized, I ran into Rick, one of Sergio's friends, at the grocery store. He was polite but distant, which stung more than outright hostility would have. "How's Sergio doing?" I asked. Trying to sound casual, Rick's expression shifted uncomfortably. "He's doing well. Really well. Actually, he's been focused on his business. Expanding into new markets? Seems happier than I've seen him in years." The implication was clear. Sergio was thriving without me. While I was struggling to maintain my career and my self-esteem, he was building something better. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I forced myself to smile and make small talk before escaping to my car. That night, I did something I'd sworn I wouldn't do. I looked him up on social media. His business page showed a thriving company with new equipment lines and expanded services. There were photos of him at industry events, looking confident and successful. In one photo, he was shaking hands with a potential client, and I could see that wedding ring tan line was completely gone. The final blow came when Diana, one of my few remaining friends, let slip that Sergio had started seeing someone new. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you," she said over coffee, "but I thought you should know before you heard it from someone else." "What's she like?" I asked, hating myself for caring but unable to stop. Diana hesitated. "She's nice. Works as a nutritionist. Really into fitness. They met at his gym." She didn't need to say more. I could picture her perfectly. Everything I used to be, and had stopped being. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd cheated on my husband because I felt he didn't appreciate me as I was, only to lose him to someone who embodied everything he'd wanted me to become. My rebellion against his expectations had freed him to find someone who shared his values and lifestyle. Look, I'm not going to pretend I was some innocent victim in all this. Yeah, I went behind his back and lied about those dates. I put myself on a dating app while I was married and told another man I was single. Those were my choices, and they had consequences. But Sergio pushed me there with his constant criticism and his obvious disappointment in who I'd become. The truth is, we were both wrong. He was wrong for making me feel like my worth was tied to a number on a scale, and I was wrong for handling it the way I did. But between us, I'm tired of being the only one who has to take responsibility for our marriage falling apart. He created the environment where I felt unwanted and unappreciated, and then acted shocked when I found appreciation somewhere else. Now I'm sitting here, almost a year later, watching him build a new life, while I'm still trying to figure out how to fix the mess I made of mine. The company finally let me go last month. Budget cuts, they said, but we all knew it was really about image and marketability. The rental properties are barely breaking even after maintenance costs. And my dating life is a series of disappointing encounters with men who see me as a convenient option rather than a prize. Maybe if Sergio had fought for our marriage instead of just criticizing me, things would have been different. Maybe if he'd made me feel desired instead of tolerated, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere for validation. But he gave up on us the moment I stopped looking like the woman he'd married. And that's on him as much as my choices are on me. I've learned that marriage isn't just about loving someone. It's about making them feel loved. We both failed at that. But I'm the one who got labeled the cheater, while he gets to be the wronged husband who deserves better. Life isn't fair, and sometimes the person who makes the bigger mistake isn't necessarily the one who caused all the problems in the first place.